And we're live.
Good afternoon, Pillar 3. Welcome to our November meeting. I'm Olivia Pearson, and I want to allow the other Pillar team members and our guests to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with our meeting today. So first, for our other Pillar 3 folks, if you could please unmute and introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll begin and just I'll ask if you could pass the mic, as it were, forward to help give us some orientation. And my name is Dave Harper, Pillar 3 member from Chesapeake Community College, serving 5 counties on Maryland's rural eastern shore. And I'll pass to Robin Werner.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Werner. I'm the CTE supervisor for Talbot County Public Schools.
I'll pass then to Kirk Murray, and if you could pass it forward after that, Mr. Murray.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kirkland Murray. I'm the local workforce development director for Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and the president of the Maryland Workforce Association, which is the association of the 13 local workforce boards in the state of Maryland. And I will pass it to Peter.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Banyas. I'm a former Howard County student board member. Now I am a sophomore at Duke studying engineering. I believe that's everyone from the committee, so I'll pass it off to Nona Carroll as our first guest.
Thank you. I'm Nona Carroll, interim CEO with the Maryland Business Roundtable for Education. And actually, I think at the last meeting, I was appointed to Pillar 3. So I am happy to be here.
Congratulations and welcome.
Thank you. I guess I'll pass it on to Molly.
Thanks, Nona. Molly Mesnar, Deputy Director of the CTE Committee, which is in the Governor's Workforce Development Board. And I will pass it to Lindsay Malig-Mayhew.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Malig-Mayhew. This is my first week in the Office of Workforce Development in Howard County, and I'm leading the Blueprint implementation work here. I'll pass to M. Johnson.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. My name is Melina Johnson. I'm grant specialist at the Lower Shore Workforce Alliance in Wicomico County. And I'm just assisting with the blueprint as well here in our counties, three lower counties. And I am gonna pass it to Shirley Lake.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shirley Lake, and I am the Blueprint Coordinator / Career Navigator with the Upper Shore Workforce Investment Board. So I'm going to pass it on to, I think, Matthew.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Matthew Duque. I'm the Director of Research at Maryland State Department of Education. I'll pass it to Lenny Piner.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lene Piner. I am the in-school youth coordinator for Cecil County Public Schools. I'm here with our program manager, Al Reeves, as well as 3 of our new career coaches. And I will pass it to, who's left? Sorry, I'm Brady Wheeler.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. So yeah, my name is Brady Wheeler with the Mayor's Office of Employment Development, leading the implementation of Blueprint at Baltimore City Schools. I'm so excited to be in community with you all on this exciting initiative.
Have we had welcome to Rachel Amstutz?
Hi there. Thanks. Great to see everybody. Rachel Amstutz, Policy Director at the AIB.
Do you want a few seconds here for AIB updates? We have an announcement from Kirk Murray, and then if you want some time for AIB updates, you're welcome to it, Rachel.
You got it.
Thank you.
Okay, Kirk. I want to pass it over to you to give us some updates, and then we'll go to Rachel.
Well, good afternoon again, everyone, and thank you, Olivia. Real quick, happy National Apprenticeship Week to everyone. As you know, high school level apprenticeships are a priority under this Pillar 3. So I thought it was good that we acknowledge that this is National Apprenticeship Week. And I'd just like to share with you, something that we were doing in Anne Arundel County around this. So last night, in partnership, was led by Anne Arundel County Public Schools and Anne Arundel Workforce Development attended and supported them with this. They had an open house last night that they really invited students and parents in to talk about the value of apprenticeship. It was standing room only, and a lot of good conversation and a lot of good questions and connecting students getting interested in high school level apprenticeship programs. So the reason I wanted to share with you all, we know we have this big audacious goal, but there is a lot of interest out there. So it was to give us hope that we're going to reach this goal. It was a very successful event. On Monday, we had an event with our county exec with a lot of department heads and businesses here in Anne Arundel County to talk about high school level apprenticeship. Again, a lot of interest from county department heads and businesses here in Anne Arundel County. So again, that's a big goal that we have, 45%, but I think it's achievable.
Thank you so much. Great news. Great news. Okay, Rachel Armstead, do you have any updates for us, AIB?
Olivia, was that for me?
Yes.
Sorry, I am in a bad reception area. So can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to keep my updates very brief. Kirk beat me to the National Apprenticeship Week, and I'm glad that he brought that up. Very important topic for us at the AIB. We're excited to hear some of the new apprenticeships in development and just looking at how they're going to expand even more opportunities for students. I loved Kirk's words, the big audacious goal. It is big. And we're rethinking things. We're thinking about what they look like and who they're for. So very important week to take stock of where we're at and think about where we're headed. In terms of updates, I'm going to keep them simple. The blueprint, the LEA blueprint 2024 submission will be due on March 15th. It's a big focus area right now for many of our school districts. But it's bigger than just our school districts. Career counseling is written into there. So that includes our local workforce board partners. There's a lot in there about in Pillar 2 of partnering with our institutions of higher education. And there's a lot of voices that get pulled into a school systems blueprint implementation plan. So just an awareness that we're shifting into that season of the districts really focusing on writing that plan. At the same time, the AIB has hired and has strategic facilitators placed in each of the 22 of the 24 LEAs and supporting the CTE committee. So there's some really cool stuff happening around that with helping everybody see the interconnectedness of all of the pillars, that while we see the work in silos sometimes, the beauty of Blueprint is how it all really connects together. And when you make a shift in one pillar, it spreads to the others. Some of the other exciting AIB news is in my team directly. Lisa Armstrong is on our call today. I believe she was on the one last month, but we're expanding our policy team. We're still hiring, and we'll be adding to the policy team and a few of our other remaining open roles. So for anybody potentially interested in joining the AIB team, keep an eye out for some of those jobs that will be posted to the state website, and we'll email out on our distribution list. So if you need to get on it, just shoot us an email at aib@maryland.gov. Lots of other things happening. So if there's any specific questions, I'm happy to take those. But really, I would love to turn this over to get into the agenda, and I think hear from our guests from MSDE.
That sounds great. I have one quick question, maybe a follow-up. Have the templates been released to the LEAs for the new plans?
So the short answer is no. The slightly longer answer is there was a meeting last week to talk about them, and they got information on what to expect and some exciting news. The template is much shorter this year. It's a list of questions. Last year, you'll remember, it was like 160 or something. This year, it's like 20 some. So our LEA partners definitely were able to take a breath of relief there to think that it's a little bit smaller in scope. And also this year, there won't be a template. There'll be the list of questions, and each LEA will be able to work on them in whatever technological format works for them, and submitting us the PDF final submission. So we're really trying to remove the template and the process as a barrier to getting to the thinking that needs to happen and the doing. But the questions will be out in the very near future. And the LEA teams have had some time to kind of think about and preview what it's going to look like.
So Rachel, not to put you on the spot, and please feel free to say no to this, but are you able to share what some of the questions in the template will be around Pillar 3?
Oh, gosh, there's so much in Pillar 3. I would hesitate from where I'm at right now to give some updates, but I would love to bring some information back to the committee. Pillar 3, as you know, is a big comprehensive pillar. So we're definitely very hyper-focused right now on our students who are not yet achieving grade level success, that aren't on track right now, and thinking about how we need to be supporting those students, but at the same time also thinking about the pathways and options available to all of our students. So those are two components that really jump out in my mind of Pillar 3, but I would be happy to bring back some of the questions as they get closer to final form. And actually, Kirk, that makes me think that it would be a wonderful opportunity to get some input from advisory committee members, just to make sure we've thought about everything in or all aspects, or that we don't miss an opportunity to think about something. So I'll definitely talk to the team and bring that back.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't believe so. Thank you so much, Rachel.
You bet.
So we're going to turn it over now to MSDE to share information regarding the research study on the College and Career Readiness Standard benchmark, or metric, excuse me.
Okay, are you able to see my screen and hear me?
Yes, we can do both.
And Matt, I'd like to take a real quick opportunity to thank you for being here with slightly short notice, but for making time to explain this for us and help us know kind of what happened and where things are.
Our pleasure. I introduced myself before. I also have Phil Lasser listed on the slide. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. He does a lot of the blueprint plans, but he had a family emergency. So basically, I'm going to give you some of the background on the CCR standard and the research study, talk about briefly what the research study covered, some of the main findings, and then talk about the next steps in the board's plan for adopting a new standard. So some of the context is, as you probably know, the blueprint requires a new college and career readiness standard be set. And the goal is for all students to meet the standard by the end of their 10th grade year. And for students that do not, they would meet it by the time they graduate. What does it mean for students is once they meet the standard, they can enter a pathway. They are called post-CCR pathways. In the blueprint, lists 3 different ones in the bullets in the middle of the slide. So there's the IB/AP/Cambridge diploma pathway. There's a dual enrollment or early college program pathway, and then there's a career and technical education program, which includes earning an industry recognized credential. For, again, the students that do not meet the CCR standard by the end of grade 10, Blueprint also requires support pathways for them so that they can meet the standard before graduating. Now, where the study comes in is the Blueprint specifically requires a study to be completed by an external entity, so external to MSDE, before the state board adopts a new standard. Furthermore, the Blueprint specifically says that the state board will adopt the CCR standard that reflects the results of this study. Another implication of the standard is students that meet it can enroll in community colleges and credit-bearing courses. And once the Blueprint is fully implemented, and that's to be determined by AIB, it states that only students who meet the CCR standard may enter these post-CCR pathways from the last slide. The current standard, which was laid out in the Blueprint and the state board put it in effect almost 2 years ago, is a test-based standard. So students have to meet proficiency in both in English, on English 10 high school exam, or a high school math test. And a high school math test. There are a lot of options there below in the blue boxes simply because we've changed tests from PARCC to, there was a 1-year MCAT that was a shortened administration, and now we're to the regular MCAT in the last 2 years. And then for math, because a lot of students do take Algebra 1 prior to high school, there is an SAT equivalent score that they could also meet. But right now, the current standard is test-based, only test, and it's an and situation, meaning they have to do both. It's not one or the other. Now, the study was conducted by American Institutes for Research, which is nonpartisan, not-for-profit. They're well-known, well-regarded. They were selected as a result of competitive process. They began almost a year ago in this study. There are multiple components to the study, which I'll go through in a minute. So that led to them releasing interim reports on different parts of the study. One was in May, one was in July. Their final report, as specified in the Blueprint, they had to submit it by September 1st, and that went to the governor, the General Assembly, AIB, MSDE. And that's posted on our website. There's a link on the slide. I think I also have a QR code at the end or slides. If you're interested in seeing the full report as well as the interim reports, there are hundreds of pages of appendices as well. And then that was presented to the state board at the end of September. So before I go into the study, I just want to point out there's a lot of stakeholder engagement around this study. We talk about it in terms of 4 different phases. The first was before the study began. Both MSDE and American Institutes for Research engaged stakeholders in how the design would be carried out and include partners in higher ed, including MHEC, Association of Community Colleges, as well as the University System of Maryland. Phase 2 of engagement was during the study, so AIR conducted focus groups, surveys, and other data collection around getting the perception of K-12 stakeholders, but also higher ed and workforce on how they perceive college and career readiness. The third phase is after each interim report that I mentioned was released. Kind of did a roadshow, at least virtually, sharing these reports and getting feedback and questions from stakeholders. So that included 10 listening sessions, over 200 stakeholders from higher ed, as well as the governor's office and LEAs, which included various staff. Then phase 4 is what we're in right now. So with the final report has been released, we've been sharing the findings in different places, different meetings like this. Some examples are MABE, the Council of Community College Academic Officers. It was presented at Maryland Assessment Group earlier this week, and so on. And feel free to jump in and ask a question at any time. But what was the actual study? So there are two main components. One in these arrows here, one was the predictive validity analysis. So it's basically ask a question of how valid is the current CCR standard in predicting students' outcomes in the future after high school. And the second was how aligned are the content standards in K through 12, specifically in high school in Maryland, with the expectations of Maryland's post-secondary institutions. There are four main objectives. So some of those I just kind of mentioned. The first objective is really what are the knowledge and skills that students need to be college and career ready. The second is around how aligned the standards in K through 12 are with post-secondary expectations. The third objective was this predictive validity notion. So how well the standard, and as well as you'll see, they looked at what other measures could be used to predict post-secondary progress. And then lastly, are there potential areas of bias, specifically within assessments that would be reflected in the CCR standard? They drew from many data sources. So in the green boxes, you see these are data for looking at alignment between content standards and post-secondary expectations. They did an inventory of the requirements of community college courses. They surveyed faculty administrators in community colleges, as well as aligning the content using content area experts to code those. The yellow boxes span multiple parts of the study. So they looked at what do other specifically high-performing states as well as other countries, how do they perceive college and career readiness? How do they measure it if they do? And what stakes are attached to those standards? There are also held focus groups, as I mentioned earlier, with faculty in colleges, representatives from workforce, as well as K-12 stakeholders. And then lastly, a literature review, specifically around the bias in assessments. And then the blue part is for the predictive validity analysis. They use data specifically on Maryland students in high school, and that went to Maryland College or University, and that data was from the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. Specifically for the predictive validity analysis, just to give you an idea of the students they looked at spanned 5 cohorts that had an expected on-time high school graduation year from 2017 to 2021. And they were able to track them from not only from 9th grade into post-secondary, but even before that, because as I mentioned, a lot of students may take Algebra 1 before 9th grade. So this included over 300,000 students, 85% of which graduated by the end of their 4th year. And don't include here, but if you look in the report, they have percentages broken out by went to college or did not, and after their first year, if they went to a community college, a 4-year college, private, and so on. So what did they find? For objective 1, they found content knowledge, and this is based on the inventory of syllabi in college, as well as focus groups. The content knowledge is very important. So specifically, as mentioned in the blueprint, it's around English, reading and writing, math, and science. And that's covered in the Maryland K-12 content standards. Some things that were identified in addition to content knowledge by higher ed were what they call skills for success. So things like collaboration, work habits, time management. Those were identified as being critical for being ready for college and career. They're not necessarily as explicit in this content standards. So those are called out as a separate bullet there. And then again, looking at other top performing education systems, one thing they found was they provide formal counseling prior to students be identified as CCR or not. And as you may be aware, this is as part of the blueprint. So that's a good thing. The second objective of the study was to look at how aligned the K-12 content standards are in Maryland with the expectations of post-secondary. And there's a lot more detail in the final report, but in general, across English language arts, math, and science, they found the content standards to be aligned with the expectations of higher ed in first year credit bearing and developmental courses. The few areas where there was less alignment, it was expected. So for example, geometry is not a big first year higher ed expectation. So there's less alignment there. Also, in addition to those, they also looked how aligned they high school standards were with national frameworks for workforce skills, and found those to be generally aligned as well. On objective 3, in terms of the predictive validity of the current standard, they found that as defined, the current interim standard, just based on tests, correctly classified about half to 2/3 of students as either college ready or not college ready. This means they call it the accuracy rate. So it's, did it identify a student as ready and they were in fact ready, or they were identified as not ready and in fact they were not ready as measured by their post-secondary outcome. And I'll show this a little different way on the next slide, but they looked at an alternative specification. So what if students, in addition to meeting CCR standard through a test, they could also meet it through a high school grade point average? And they found that not only increased how many students were identified, but also improved the accuracy rate or the validity of the standard. So this is in graphic form. So they looked at so the interim standard, the first bar on the slide, the interim standard in the cohorts they looked at. So set students who graduated from 2017 to 2021, less than half, 40% of students had met the standard by the end of grade 10. And for those students that went off to post-secondary, about 2/3 were correctly classified, meaning that this interim standard, when applied right to those cohorts, was right 2/3 of the time in predicting students being ready or not. Okay. Now, one other way to look at it is, so 40% are meeting the standard, that means 60% are not, but also it's right, the standard was right 2/3 of the time. That means 35% of the time, 35% of standards, students were not correctly identified. So that could be either students that met the standard, but were in fact not ready, or they did not meet the test standard, but they went on to post-secondary and were able to meet the benchmarks. In terms of the alternate option, this shows adding a high school GPA of 3.0 is what they looked at in the AIR study. You see that in the first set of bars, the percentage of students who met the standard by the end of grade 10 increases from 40% to 64%. So that's a big jump. But it also, at the same time, increases the accuracy of the standard from 65% to 75%. And this is an important point because it's showing that adding GPA as an option is not only more inclusive, but is making it a better predictor. So then objective 4, again, was around potential areas of bias in assessments. And there's a lot of literature that shows that standardized assessments are often subject to cultural bias. And in addition, in terms of preparing students for assessments and those opportunities, there are inequities in that as well. So what did AIR recommend? Generally, they're recommending that Maryland provide multiple measures for students to demonstrate their readiness, so not just a test measure. They recommend this GPA measure, and this is based on not only what they heard from stakeholders, the literature on the bias in assessments I mentioned, there's the numbers I just showed you, but also this isn't the first study to look at this and find these types of things. So there's a lot of prior research that found the same thing on these measures. And then lastly, they just mentioned that if GPA option is included, there should be guidance to better standardize, because they did find some variation in across local education agencies and how well the GPA predicted post-secondary progress. Of course, they had a lot more recommendations. If you're interested, you can look in the study. Now, in terms of moving forward and proposals, you saw the slide before, but just as a reminder, the current standard is test-based. Students need to be proficient in English and math at the high school level. This is what it looks like in diagram form, so it's very simple. In the gray box, if they meet both standards for state assessment, they meet the CCR standard. If not, they do not. So in the last state board meeting in October, MSD staff took this proposal to the board. It's essentially the prior one, but we're adding in high school GPA as an option, so they can meet it either by high school GPA or by test. If you watch the board meeting, you'll know that the board came back with an additional request. So it complicates it, at least in the diagram somewhat, but you'll notice, so on the left, we still have GPA and the tests. Two changes were, one, that if a student were to meet the CCR standard through GPA, they would also have to demonstrate some algebra proficiency. So that's either through getting an A, B, or C grade in Algebra 1, or by scoring proficient on the Algebra 1 MCAP. The other difference here is, you may notice, this only calls out Algebra 1, whereas the current standard and the previous slide, students were able to demonstrate proficiency in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, or geometry. So this one really focuses on Algebra 1. Some of the details that we've been discussing is, in terms of identifying students, it would happen pretty much immediately. LEAs would identify students and be reported to MSDE through the high school data collection, which is at the end of the year, but students that are eligible, it would be applied. It could be applied retroactively for students that had met whatever the standard turns out to be. The funding would begin with FY26. The one thing to note is there is a lag on that because student identification happens shortly after numbers are submitted for funding. And then just lastly, we'll continue to engage LEAs on how to get this system going. In terms of timeline, so I mentioned last month we had the October board meeting, presented recommendations. We're currently in a public input period right now, and I'll share the feedback survey. If you're interested, you can take that. Goes till the end of the month, so almost 2 more weeks. There was a virtual public hearing last week that was streamed on YouTube. If you're interested, you can go back. They had people could sign up and give 3-minute comments on the CCR standard. And so ultimately the board is planning to vote on the new CCR standard at the December board meeting, which is December 5th. So I mentioned the feedback survey. There's a QR code here. There's also a link for the survey, but also I mentioned the reports and everything are on this webpage here, blueprint.marylandpublicschools.org, CCR research study. And again, the survey will remain open until the 30th of the month. So I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions if you have it. Thank you for your time.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
So one thing that I have been reading about with CCR is that many states or even countries have very different definitions of CCR. excuse me, and I appreciate that this study is helping to clear that up for Maryland. But one thing that I've been reading a lot about is that a lot of our definitions tend to really focus on the college part of CCR and not the career part. So the one thing that I guess I'm a little concerned about is where does the career part fall in this? Because although GPA is another indicator and may include more students, that GPA in up to 10th grade is in classes that students typically don't have a chance of having electives in, because their first 2 years of high school are usually determined based off of required courses, such as their year-long ELA and math and those types of courses. So it seems a little skewed towards the college side of that. They're not having the opportunity to have elective coursework where they may be engaging in something that's more career driven. So I was wondering if there's been any discussion about another possible indicator of CCR being success in the introductory class of a CTE program or apprenticeship program. So for example, if they take the first class in a program or the related instruction for an apprenticeship program and they're successful, could we use that as an indicator for CCR, since that will lead to one of our post-secondary pathways?
Right. So this has come up before. Unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for that, because I know at least from the research side, AIR did try to look at that in terms of different outcomes besides post-secondary. Unfortunately, there just aren't many good ones. They tried to look at some earnings, but it didn't show much. So I don't have a good answer. It's a valid point. I believe it came up at the public hearing as well. But you're right, the focus does seem on academics and post-secondary.
Can I ask a clarifying question as to why the funding would take place in fiscal year 26 if this is going to be voted on this year? I'm just wondering why it couldn't take place in fiscal year 25.
My understanding, it's around the collection of the data. So the data is collected at the end of the year, and by the time it's cleaned and validated, it's not in time for the deadline for the funding. But I'm far from an expert on this. So.
Thank you.
That would make sense. Olivia, we tend to turn everything in over the summer. So we're actually into the next fiscal year when we turn it in because of the school calendars.
Got it.
And I know this is something that's come up before, because obviously with community colleges, the lag in funding is an issue.
Yes, I'm just thinking about these students, the cost for them to complete their post-CCR pathways and being able to realize that while they're still our students. But it seems like it would be potentially after that. Kirk, I saw your hand up, and then Peter.
So Matt, thank you very much for presenting this. Couple questions. One question is, are you able to share this slide deck with us as a follow-up to this meeting? I think this is good information here. I think you did a good job at explaining how the study was done and the outcome of the study.
Certainly. Should I share it with?
I
can share it with everyone.
Oh, if you want to send it to me, Matt, I'd be happy to get it out to everybody.
Okay.
Thanks. I'm gonna. I mean, my real. I don't want to use the word concern, because not really that. I agree with Robin. This seems very post-secondary and not really judging if a student is career ready. And I guess my question for you is, what input did you get from businesses on this, from employers? I mean, ultimately the goal is to make sure students, no matter if they're going post-secondary or going straight into the workforce, that they're ready to go into that workforce. So where was there any interaction with businesses or feedback from businesses?
I know AIR had at least one focus group with what we call workforce. And I'd have to check, but I think most of that was focused on their perceptions of readiness. So they identify they should be able to read and write, for example.
Yeah, well, reading, right. I mean, as someone who works closely with businesses every day, when they're looking for, like you said, those basic skills, reading, writing, and if the job requires arithmetic, be able to do that. But those soft skills, and I think you mentioned a little bit of those soft skills or those what we call essential skills. I think you mentioned a little bit of that, but I mean,
yeah, I think
that's
there's
what
a
we're
little
hearing
bit
from
more.
businesses that they're really looking for.
Right, and I think there's a little more detail in the final report around like soft skills.
Okay.
They're difficult to measure, but if there's a way, I think it's a recommendation that we should try to do that. But certainly that would be, not because we don't currently have a measure for that, or an instrument or a tool. That would be something that would take years. But I think it's an important caveat, something to look at.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Peter has a hand.
Couple questions for you. First one, you mentioned that once the AIB determines that Blueprint is fully implemented, then only the students designated as CCR ready would be able to do the post-CCR pathways. Is being designated as CCR ready, is that also like a gateway barrier for getting a diploma as well, or is this just for those post-CCR tracks?
This is just CCR. Yeah, so it's separate from graduating. Graduation still has the same credit requirements.
Okay, sounds good. Appreciate that. Second, what my colleagues were saying is very true, but I totally understand this is really a data science problem, and it's incredibly difficult to get good, clean data on things like soft skills when most of the historical data we have is just test scores and GPA, and that's very limited, right? We're using a small set of some data to try and extrapolate much bigger interpretations of the capabilities and skills and personalities of an individual. So I understand that's challenging, and I appreciate all your work trying to look into this. You showed us the new sort of like counter proposal that the AIB came up with. I've been doing some math on my end with the specificity and the sensitivity data on the proposals in the report. Have you guys been able to get those numbers for how this flowchart would cause those type 1 and type 2 errors?
We're working on it. We don't have them yet.
Okay, not a problem.
I did hear from, just as a aside, I heard from when I presented this the other day from an LEA that looked at it specifically for their district, and they said very, very few students that would be excluded from the GPA requirement because they didn't meet this algebra requirement. Because essentially what this proposal does, different from the previous one, what we presented as a proposal is adding in math proficiency requirement on top of GPA. So essentially they're saying like, most students that have a 3.0 GPA either got an A, B, or C in algebra or proficient on algebra 1 and 10.
I see. Okay, thank you. I have some other comments, but less about questions, so I appreciate it.
I would just add, you reminded me, so for the soft skills, like it could be argued that GPA captures some of that, at least, because you think about the grade, it's like time management and even working with your teacher, or there are different things in there that the test doesn't capture.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go to Dave and then back to Robin.
Okay, thank you. Just echoing the college and career readiness, just to say, I think I know that was a deliberate decision, but what we've learned in community colleges over the years, so speaking as a community college professional, we're open access institutions, so we're often assessing college readiness. And what we've learned working with our dual enrollment partners, the LEAs, the high schools, the CTE programs, is that, this is ultimately about expanding access, expanding opportunities for Maryland high school students. And if you want to expand access to CTE programs, what's really helpful is a college or career readiness. Sometimes you have students languishing in the back of poetry classes, and some of the fine arts may not fire them up, but there are other forms of study in the career and technical education that can. And so what we have in our MOUs in our region, which serves 5 counties, is different assessment standards. And that allows us to really provide better access and to better match programs with student skill sets and interest levels and things like that. So if the spirit of this, which I read to be expanding access to opportunities, and if the specific goal is 45% apprenticeship or industry certification, by 2030, if that's our goal, I think a college or career or multiple assessments to acknowledge that would help us to get to that 45%. Now, I recognize I'm kind of morphing into the recommendations to the AIB. So this is less a question to you in the study and more of a pillar 3. I'm framing this as kind of a pillar 3 recommendation to the AIB.
Okay. I think it was Robin and then Peter.
Oh, could I ask one quick question for Matt?
Sure. Is that Rachel?
It is. Matt, with that type of information, is there, or I know there was public opportunity for the public to provide input as well. Is that still ongoing or is that closed?
So the feedback form is still open.
Okay, great. So we
On
can
this
gather
slide,
that
yeah.
as well.
Yes,
Okay.
so that's open until the end of the month.
Great, thank you.
So the plan is to gather that, summarize it, and provide it to the board before the 5th.
Thank you. Are you able to put that link in our chat? I believe the chat is visible to everyone. Thank you so much. Robin, comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Dave's point. He covered a lot of actually what I was going to say, but there's one item that this is more of a comment and not really a question. And I know, Matt, we're throwing a lot of questions at you, and it's just, we're just trying to make sure that like we have everyone represented. We know that you can't answer everything. So I appreciate you coming in and taking all of our questions. But under objective 1, there was a part in the summary in the beginning that highlights the top performing education systems with formal CCR counseling. And it highlighted that none of the top 3 performing states in the analysis use CCR assessments to determine which students can access certain courses or post-secondary pathways in high school. That really stuck out to me because that contradicts what is happening in a few years for us. I appreciate that research and that level of detail of those states that do have really well established programs. But I think this is a bigger question for the group. I think for our team and for giving feedback to AIB, that really sticks out to me in this study more than anything. I mean, other than the fact that they're confirming what a lot of us have been saying over the past year on this team, which is that there needs to be multiple pathways and multiple measures to establish CCR. But that piece, I think, really needs to go back to the AIB, MSCE, CTE committee, all the different committees, because that's something that we've been raising some concerns about. And I'm especially concerned about that for CTE pathways, because like Dave said, there's a lot of opportunities with CTE pathways. I know you mentioned that like they do learn soft skills in their courses, which is true. I mean, I was a science teacher and then I was also a CTE teacher. And I will say I taught more of those industry skills as a CTE teacher because they're embedded specifically in CTE's curriculum, our Maryland framework. So it concerns me of having that gatekeeper of students who really may need some of that specific level of skills for careers might not having access to it. We were just at Chesapeake College today, one of the career counselors and myself, for a really great meeting with the Workforce Development Board and their manufacturing department. And they were sharing that they're developing courses to give some of those entry-level skills for manufacturing. And it's a course that they've created based off of employers who have been telling Chesapeake of what are some things that they need. It's not necessarily any specific industry credential, although they lead to them, but it was just an industry, or it was just a class to prepare them to take those industry level credentials. And we all discussed how that would be a great opportunity for dual enrollment for students who are going in that career pathway. And to me, that's a prime example of a student who needs to be able to obtain that post-secondary, who may not be able to because of the way things are written right now. But then also, if they're successful in that class at Chesapeake College, to me, that indicates that they are career and college ready, because we had a group of employers stating these are the skills that we need. And then we have a course that was designed for that. And then data saying that those students met it. Like there's direct alignment there. So I think that that's the type of collaboration that Blueprint is really making us think about and push for. And it is working. Like I'm seeing that happening. I just hope that it can still be captured in all of this data and where we go forward with this with CCR and what it means to be CCR. So it wasn't really a question. It was just a statement for the group of something that really stuck out for me.
Right. I would just say, hey, your point underscores the importance of getting this right. And you're right. In at least the AIR study looked at Massachusetts, Connecticut, Colorado. And at least in those states, while they have a CCR standard, they're not, they don't have the consequences or implications for students. It's a label, but it doesn't necessarily send them to a pathway. At the same time, I think pretty much all of those states' standards are based on tests. So they might look at state tests or SAT or other ACT, other tests, but so they don't use things like GPA, although they are used. For example, Massachusetts use it for higher ed. So it's important to get it right given the high stakes attached to this.
Absolutely. Robin, that was actually exactly what I was worried about, that exact point, which is this makes sense, college and career readiness as a label to say maybe that this has something to do with the standards that we need to have to award a diploma or something like that, to say, okay, a student has gone through this educational system and they're ready to move on to the next stage of their life. That's what college and career readiness is. If this is being used as a new artificial gateway to stop students from taking an AP class they like, from taking a CTE class or a CTE program that they want to do, that I think really goes against even though I guess that's the text of Blueprint, I think it goes against what the spirit, the intent of that was. I think probably the legislator's goal was not to say, we're going to put more barriers that's going to make it harder for students to get to CCR ready by demanding that they reach some sort of readiness level earlier before they even need to, right? Before they're on that graduation stage, where we're demanding that they get to it sooner in order to have the full scope of educational opportunities. That doesn't sit right with me. I'm right there with you, with Robin. And I also want to point out sort of the alternative is what we have right now, which is when students go through and they're planning their courses for next year, there's a conversation between the student, their parent, and their teachers about what class they want to go for next year. So if the student's in, say, English 10, and they can that teacher who knows that student on a personal level can give a much more informed recommendation on whether that student is prepared to go take AP Lang versus a non-AP version of English than any sort of arbitrary state down test or determination is going to make. So I'm very, very concerned about that. And my other actual question was, I'm taking a machine learning class right now and dealing with a lot of high dimensional data sets, and I would be very curious and excited to try and work through this data set. Is this something that that is like publicly available, that's disaggregated so that students' privacy is respected? Because there's a lot of interesting data things I'd like to do here.
It is not
Okay.
publicly available, no. So as I mentioned, AIR, they had to work through the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center to get permission to use the data. There's a lot of security safeguards and whatnot.
Fair enough. Worth a shot.
Yeah, I will say it might be in the link I just shared, but what they did was talking about machine learning. What I presented was just a couple numbers, but they looked at all kinds of combinations of permutations of what if, the standard is getting 12 credits your first semester versus 15, and what about this grade point average versus that grade point average? And they looked at every type of college, GPA versus this and that. And they did compile it into a website, so you're able to search, like pick different criteria.
Nice.
If I can find that and put that.
Okay, that would be great. And then one other thing I wanted to mention is just working through the study and doing a bit of math on the back end. The thing that matters to me isn't accuracy, it's the false positives and the false negatives, right? It's that 1- percentage. And I guess the most important thing here, since this isn't really putting the label on students isn't doing anything for them other than serving as the literal gateway between them taking the CTE and the higher level classes they want to. So in my opinion, the false positive, the 1- sensitivity, basically the question of, are we telling students that are, or sorry, false negative. Are we telling students who are qualified that they're not qualified, even with the inclusive and the alternate with GPA plan? That's still 19% of the time. That means 1 in 5 students who should, under this determination of what makes them college and career ready, 1 in 5 of them, we're still telling them, no, you can't take AP classes. No, you can't do CTE. And that does not sit right with me. So enough pontificating for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter.
I just want to say that reminds me that while the board is pushing to adopt the new standard in December, certainly like something we'll monitor over time, and certainly I don't see why it could not be revised. There are a lot of conditions raised here today that could be added to it.
Okay, I think it's Nona.
Yes. And so I just want to, I believe that my understanding is that if a student is deemed not to be college career ready, then remediation there's supposed to be remedial steps from there, right? So that we can get them on path to do that.
Right, the blueprint requires each LEA in their implementation plans, they had to detail their support pathway, how students would be supported to meet the standard.
Yes. So because we do direct programming in the schools, and no, we're not, teachers, but I have actual program specialists who work with low-income students in 5 of the rural districts. And we have a number of students under a 3.0. And so, we know that they're going to fall in that. And that's really part of the work that we do, is trying to get them, their GPAs up. And so, and, we work with about 1,700 students. And so that's, very small subset of the students throughout the state. But we know that it's going to be a huge impact on them. So I think, the good thing about doing this measurement so early is that you can provide those interventions and get them on track. But, the concerns also with them, moving forward in the pathways, it could deter some of what able to do. So I just wanted to clarify that that's the aim, is that we're trying to get them on track if they aren't deemed CCR ready.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, did you have anything else to add?
I have a follow-up, but you can move us and my follow-up will dovetail if that's okay.
That's perfect. So thank you so much, Matt, for coming to our meeting and sharing this very valuable information with us. We had some initial discussion during our last meeting, and so it was great to really get the breakdown from you today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are going to go for this committee until 4 o'clock. And so, Matt, feel free to stay if you would like. We want to just have some additional committee discussion and dialogue prior to the conclusion of the meeting. So, Dave, are you ready to add your comment?
I just want to thank the presenter and thank MSDE. So thank you, Matthew, and acknowledging that the results of that empirical study are expanded access from where we began with the interim plus the GPA. It's a measure of sustained student effort, not just a single high stakes exam, which may have equity issues, So we acknowledge that and celebrate that. That's good. Community colleges are about access. Blueprint's about access. And just to that point, one of the things, my follow-on to the concerns that Peter and Nona just expressed, was that one of the options that AIB has, which Pillar 3 recommended that they delay the full implementation of Blueprint, because once Blueprint is declared by AIB as fully implemented, then the CCR assessment becomes the only gateway to these other opportunities. And if that can be delayed for a time, because what we have right now is the interim assessment is operating, and there is some flexibility between LEAs and community colleges based on their current MOUs. The way that we've been operating, we've learned to have some flexibility around CTE students who may not have the 3.0 here, but do in their course of study, where they're passionate and engaged, and we can work with them there. So we've just learned some nuance that allows us to keep that expanded access. And at the moment that it's fully declared implemented, that's when there's no options. That nuance goes away. So I'm just encouraging MSDE, and I hope that's something that may come out of this subcommittee, that we look carefully at the data and at these kinds of questions and concerns that are being raised, and delay that declaration of full implementation to give us flexibility in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I think as I'm hearing everyone's dialogue, I keep thinking about that student who may not have a stellar GPA, may have passed Algebra 1, not deemed CCR ready, and then we're thinking about that support pathway, but do we want to put that student in a loop? And so if you got through a course, and all of us know what it's like to struggle through a particular course that may not be your area of passion or expertise, then, making sure we're able to support that student to their next steps, and not, have them in this eternal loop and not able to take advantage of what may spark them to be, their greatest self, in a way that we still can kind of help, wrap around them and provide those supports.
So are we ready to begin, or to continue? I've written several potential recommendations that we can look at in our shared notes. But we have 20 minutes. Do we want to spend some of that time? We should reserve the last few to talk about our next meeting. But do you want to spend the next 10 or 12 minutes talking about recommendations we might consider for AIB?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the good thing is our next meeting is on post CCR pathways. And so it lends well to this discussion.
I can pick that up. That's helpful. Oh, go ahead, Robin.
No, I was just going to say, I think that sometimes where I get caught up on this is the language that we're using with CCR, because a lot of CCR, meaning that kids are college and career ready, we're saying that they're college and career ready when they're 15 years old. We don't really expect students to be able to leave 10th grade and go into the workforce. And I understand the point and the reason that the blueprint is written that way is so there's some accountability on LEAs to make sure students are on track. But really, wouldn't it make more sense if the language was changed that they are CCR on track, like labeling where they're at in that progression? Because if you work with students who are in middle and high school, especially 9th and 10th grade, I was an administrator, a high school administrator. I worked really closely with a 10th grade class for a year. They are not developmentally ready to be moving on to college career ready, but we could identify that they're on track, right? They have not been the whole way through high school yet. The whole purpose is that by the time they end high school, that high school prepares them for CCR. So I feel like we're being evaluated as LEAs and they've only gotten through halfway through their high school experience, which is determining all of these things. It's determining funding for us. It's determining whether students need certain supports, whether they can go into post-secondary pathways. So is there any way to reconsider some of the language that we use, and instead of deeming them CCR ready at the end of 10th grade, saying that they are CCR on track or making progress, instead of saying, yes, this student is CCR? It just seems like such a large label for a student, I don't know the word to use, that is only finishing 10th grade. And I know that is a huge thing that none of us really have control over, but that is something that really just doesn't sit right with me with some of this. I think that's where I get hung up, is that label so early in their high school career.
I like that recommendation. And I also will just point us to, in our pillar, that is how it's identified for our younger grades. And so for the students in elementary, middle, and 9th grade, we talk about the on track to CCR. And so I think it would be a great recommendation if we could continue that language throughout high school, especially since we're saying that the determination of a student being CCR should not preclude them at this point from participating in a post-CCR pathway. It just means we're going to add in some support. But I want to hear, of course, what the rest of the committee has to say about that. So, Peter, I see your hand is raised.
Certainly, I think that's a great idea. I also, one other thing came to mind. Is Matthew still here?
He is
Yes.
not. Oh,
Yes.
he is.
Thank
Oh,
you.
okay. I
I'm so
missed
sorry.
him.
I should have asked this
Sorry.
earlier. In the study, it seemed like a lot of these metrics of how we're defining whether a student later was proven to be college and career ready was that, oh, they took 12 credits in their freshman fall, or they had some sort of retention across college and all those things. So all of them seem to be about college. So for the students that went straight into the workforce or did like apprenticeships and things like that, was the way that you modeled that in your data set giving them like a failing grade on that metric, or zeros, or did you have it null? How did you deal with that?
For students that did not attend college, they were not included in the that part of the analysis. So they just kind of dropped from the sample. And initially they looked at students who just went straight from high school graduation to post-secondary. They looked at another analysis for students that skipped a year in between. And interestingly, I think that group, although somewhat small, the interim standard was actually pretty good for them
Good as in
in
how
terms
would
of
you,
it had higher predictive validity, higher accuracy rate.
and the metric you were using to verify if they were successful was what? Was it salary? How did you determine it?
No, sorry, I'm talking about students who took a gap year, for example, in between high school and college. So they still had a first year college outcome of 12 or 15 credits.
I see. So I seem to remember, at least in Howard County, I think 20% of students didn't go on straight to college. And I think that's higher in different parts of the state. That's a huge, huge part of the data set that we're just dropping.
Yeah, so certainly it aligns with the conversations here about college and career, career, that the results of the study are really only generalizable to students who go on to college.
I see. Okay.
Which isn't aligning to the 45. That's not, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm just thinking out loud, like that doesn't align to the 45% goal of us getting industry credentials and apprenticeship. Sorry, Peter, I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm so sorry.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah. I'm thinking maybe a potential way to rethink this analysis is if we get rid of the idea of a college and career readiness metric and have a college readiness. I'm looking at Olivia, your background for a college readiness determinant and maybe a career readiness determinant, because if the way that we're determining CCR readiness as like validating using a metric is explicitly college things, then that means that the predicted sample training set needs to be just that sector. So then maybe if we're doing career, maybe we do that as a separate analysis with separate data points being used as predicted and separate if we can find some sort of data point to use as a validation data set, if that makes any sense.
Peter, I so appreciate your question because without that, I don't think I interpreted the data in that way. And so thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm processing kind of what you're saying, the college readiness versus the career readiness. And the other piece is that also comes into play when we're talking about the support pathways, right? And so I heard Robin talk about a support pathway that kind of talks about maybe some soft skills that can be done with the college. And maybe that can be something where a GPA qualifier is different than what we're using for students who may want to participate in a dual enrollment or other types of certification type courses. The other question that comes to my mind is about that reassessment piece. And so I know there's some language in the blueprint about having an opportunity to reassess. And so I'm wondering if we have, let's say, a support pathway for students who are interested in career that includes a collaboration with the college, would they be reassessed, or would that be their qualifier? Like, you know what, you're wanting to do this program of study, you're not on path to be CCR at this point. Therefore, we're going to recommend you take this class that we've crafted at the college. And then with this class, that will qualify you to take advantage of these CTE courses or this apprenticeship.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's certainly right.
I also want to thank you, Peter, for pointing that out. I had made some assumptions with reading that as well. So thank you for asking this question.
Taking a moment to note that any of this text can be edited. Can you see these red and blue notes that are attempts to capture our discussion? You can drop suggestions or edits in the chat or just name them. We can also edit it after this if need be, but just wanting to make sure that we're capturing what we're saying as accurately as possible.
Would this take place from filling out the feedback form, or individually? Is this something we would be submitting from our committee?
We can do both, but yes, what I'm starting to draft here is what could be a committee submission from Pillar 3 to AIB.
Perfect. Yes, definitely do both. And yes, these notes will be passed up to our staff team, and then also to Mara Doss on the team as well.
Cool. I'll continue my pontificating if no one else has anything to say at this moment. Okay. So like I was saying before, the 19% false negative rates, which is the amount of students based on the alternative with GPA or inclusive systems that we're still unfairly denying an educational opportunity from 10th grade on, we need to find a way to get that to 0, in my opinion. There's different ways you can do that. You can use different metrics as your validator set, but that's kind of just a thing of interpretation. So if we're trying to find a way to ensure that every student that is able to, in some respect, get through their first freshman fall, is able to take the AP and dual enrollment classes that they'd like to, then I don't think it really... Let me take a step back. There's so many different dimensions of this data set that it runs into a challenge of thinking of this from a mathematically optimal version, where we get this down to near 0% inaccuracy, and making something that is clearly understandable and usable by counselors and by students. I know somewhere in the data, in the study, you guys talk about making sure that students in 9th grade, in 10th grade, that their parents, even in middle school, that they know what are the requirements to get the CCR threshold. And I think that's a really important, noble goal so that people can plan in that respect. But the optimal way to ensure that we're not misclassifying people would be to run some machine learning algorithms on all of these dimensions, rather than making like single binaries on a single dimension and then doing that or something else. There's probably more mathematically optimal ways of combining, maybe as you get a higher score on one thing, that on a gradient allows you to be okay with a slightly lower score on another and still find a way to nestle all of those together. And it's an impossible task, right? You guys are trying to make clear guidance for people. But in the process of making something that's easily explainable, I think that almost traps us into a box of making something that is wrong and leads, in this case, seemingly to really bad outcomes in blocking students. So maybe that's a decision point that AIB needs to consider, which is how well do they want counselors and students to be able to look at a pretty picture and be able to understand the binaries of what counts as good and what counts as bad, versus would we rather have a more complicated system that ensures that we're not blocking students from taking the opportunities they need? That's my 2 cents.
I hear the common theme of access resonating, and I just wanted to bring one point. I know Olivia will soon move us toward discussion of our next agenda and so forth, and conclusions, but there's an MOU, Peter, that has your comments are spot on. We want to expand access, and not everybody assesses the same way. Not everyone performs the same way. So it really has to be nuanced to capture as much accuracy in as many students as possible, different kinds of people with different kinds of talents and abilities. But community colleges have had to do this for a long time, many years. We've been trying to evaluate juniors, seniors, sometimes younger, for their college readiness as open door institutions, as dual enrollment institutions. And there's an MOU between the superintendents of the state throughout the state of Maryland and the 16 community college presidents throughout the state of Maryland. And it has a very complicated rubric that has evolved and developed over many years to give alternative measures. There are probably 12 or 15 different alternative measures defined on that MOU by which students in different pathways can qualify. Because what's happened is program directors, faculty, and guidance counselors have come to us year after year after year and say, hey, here's so-and-so. I know she can do it because X. Oh, and so that's how it has developed. So it's kind of evolved organically. So there is a resource out there. And it's funny that I applaud the MSDE empirical study work. It has arrived at a near identical, although more narrow at this time, standard that the college superintendent, the college president and superintendent MOU. But if you look at them side by side, they're starting to rhyme. One of them has just developed quite a bit farther over the past few years. So just an echo on your access point, and then I'll get out of Olivia's way.
Can I make one suggestion before I forget to cover the readiness for career, that career aspect, because I'm hearing what I think a lot of us are saying on this, which is lumping them together of college and career. College, it seems to be taking over. There are assessments for career readiness, like explicitly for career readiness. There's the career preparation behavior scale test. There's the career thoughts inventory assessment. These assessments have been around for years. They're more career driven. Could we not give those assessments as well as an indicator? There's also assessments that have a lot of things with student self-efficacy, how they feel prepared. I just think that there needs to be something that has explicit assessment for the career part of it. And there are exams that do exist for that. And they cover some of those behaviors and soft skills as well to give employers a clear outlook. And also, if you had a student who was taking those tests, so if we had students in 10th grade and they still take their state assessments, but maybe did not perform as well, they also opted to take one of these career inventory assessments that are national assessments. That would actually give us an inventory on the student's individual needs for those soft skills, where to Olivia's point about having the the support pathways, we would have data in support pathways depending on where students wanted to go. So if a student wanted to go the CTE route, but did not score well on some of their assessments, but we had their career inventory assessment, whichever one, Maryland chose to use, school counselors and teachers and administrators would have actual data on what skills leading to a career is this individual student needing, and then a support pathway for them could be tailored to them. Because unfortunately, a lot of educators don't necessarily have that level of individuality for skills like that. So it's just something to throw out there before I couldn't think of some of the names of them, and I had to kind of look at some notes I had before, but there are some career inventory assessments. And I noticed on the feedback form, I went to the link, and that I don't think that was an option for that. I think I could write that in separately, but I just wanted to put a little plug in. I don't know how the group would feel about that as a recommendation, but it's just something to consider to have more specific data relating to careers.
I like that a lot. I think that that's a whole nother research study. So I like it.
It is.
The good thing is, Blueprint, we've got more time before the Blueprint becomes fully implemented, and we're not, holding a student back, but I absolutely believe in that. And so I know there's a lot of other feelings about, some of these other assessments, like even the ASVAB. But, that's a huge assessment that is used, of course, in our nation for our armed forces, but can be utilized for a lot of other areas as well. So it looks like we're coming to an end of our time. Unfortunately, I had to come out and come back in, so I'm glad I'm back. Are we in a place that we can wrap up this meeting? Do we have some solid recommendations, Dave?
So we do. We have drafts that I can share out to make sure there aren't errors before we provide to AIB. And our next meeting is scheduled for December, and it's to include hopefully Rachel Heiss and some additional community college reps to talk about that partnership. But if there are other things, like we can update that agenda on that same thread, that same email thread, if we need to make an adjustment.
Sounds great. So I look forward to next week's discussion where we really delve into these post CCR pathways. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And Matthew,
everyone.
thank you.